Right. So in the last class, we were talking about few guidelines, those we should follow whenever we write any technical document. So if we are writing a proposal for a project or a project report or any other kind of technical document, a research paper or something like that, then few of the important points we need to consider and we need to follow those points. So we were discussing about these important points. So we talked about the preamble, right? And we have seen that if we are writing a technical report and if it has several chapters, sections or subsections, then each chapter should have some preamble. So it should not be the case that after giving the title to the chapter or title of a section, immediately we are starting with bullets. No, it should not happen. Whenever we write any chapter, we should first write some introductory part for that chapter. So a preamble is an introductory and expressionary statement in a document that explains the purpose of the document or the underlying philosophy why we are writing that chapter or that section. Okay, so we have seen the examples also. If we are having in our report chapter number 2 that deals with literature review, then this is the preamble that we should provide. So this preamble actually describes what has been included in this chapter. Okay, so see here, for example, this chapter includes the present theories and practices of the lip reading system. Various research papers were reviewed to understand the work done in this area and to identify the gap in the existing systems. So this is the preamble that we have written for this literature review. Okay, so similarly, we should write the preamble for every chapter, even for every section also. Okay, now also it is really very important to maintain the logical flow and the content of the chapters or the sections. So in fact, we provide you the template. So that template actually has the chapters those you should include in a typical sequence. Okay, so that sequence is designed considering the logical flow of the content that we are producing as a part of that report. Okay, so always maintain the logical flow while designing the chapters, the sections and subsections. Okay, it should not happen that you are copying some text from somewhere, okay, and it looks like there are certain patches, those are assembled in the report. It should not happen. The reader should feel that all the content is presented logically and there is some connection between the paragraphs, between the chapters, between the sections and so on. Usually it is also a good practice that similar to having a preamble for every chapter, you may have a summary at the end of the chapter. So whatever is discussed in that chapter, you may summarize that. If the chapter length is too big, then it is a good practice that at the end of the chapter, you may write a summary, whatever is being discussed in that particular chapter. And then you relate the content of that chapter with the next chapter to maintain the flow, to maintain the link. So this is one important guideline. Next, we talked about the use of abbreviations and acronyms. So usually in a project report, we are having the list of abbreviations or acronyms, which is the alphabetical list, and that represents whichever are the shortened forms or short forms those we are using along with their full forms. Okay, so we produce such kind of a table initially, and we have such kind of a table in our initial pages of the report. Okay, so we introduce every acronym before we use that acronym in the text. Also, important guideline that we should understand and we should follow is, whenever the first time we are using a particular term, we should put the acronym in parenthesis after the full form of the term. So if we are using a particular term, say for example here, there is one acronym. See here, there is one acronym, say discrete Fourier transform, discrete Fourier transform. Okay, so whenever in the text I'll be using discrete Fourier transform, this full term I need to use wherever first time I need to use that term or I need to write that term, I'll be using it like I'll be writing in full form, discrete Fourier transform, and in parenthesis I'll write the acronym for that. So whenever it occurs for the very first time, I'll be using both. Then onwards I can stick to only the acronym DFT. So after the first occurrence of this phrase or this term, I'll be using both full form and short form. But then onwards, I may use only the acronym. That is one important point that we should follow. Okay. Also, in the last class, we have seen some common Latin abbreviations, like for example, that is etc., ETAL. Okay, and we know the meanings of all these abbreviations. For example, E dot G dot is, for example, I dot E dot, it is that is, ETC and so on, ETAL and other people. So we have seen these Latin abbreviations. These are common Latin abbreviations. So these abbreviations are not being included in this particular table. So whatever are the common abbreviations, we are not going to include it in the table. Okay, only the specific short forms, specific acronyms or abbreviations, those we are making use of in our technical document, only those we are including in this table. Okay, but still these are few common abbreviations, those we should use. Okay, so we have seen how to use those abbreviations in the last class. Now today focusing upon one important concept as far as writing of the document is considered, and we'll be talking about the voice that we need to make use of while writing the technical document. So in fact, we know all these are the grammatical details, and you have learned all those details in your school days. Whenever you learn English, okay, so we are having in English, we are having the voices like active voice and passive voice. Okay, so this is just the revision. So treat this as the revision. You know all these concepts. But today we will be focusing upon, while writing a document, whether we should use active voice or whether we should use passive voice, or when to use active voice and when to use passive voice. Okay, so revise the concepts. What is active voice basically? Active voice refers to the sentence format that emphasizes the doer of an action. I'll repeat, active voice refers to a sentence format that emphasizes the doer of an action. Okay, so whoever is carrying out the action, that doer is being emphasized in active voice. Passive voice. In passive voice, the action being performed is emphasized. The action being performed is emphasized, and the doer sometimes may be omitted. So you know this very well. Right? So what is active voice? Active voice refers to a sentence format in English that emphasizes the doer of the action, whereas in passive voice, the action being performed is emphasized. And sometimes the doer may be omitted. Let us see the example of active voice and the passive voice. So, if we are writing a statement or a sentence in active voice, let us see one example. We may write the statement or the sentence like, the authors conducted experiments on predicting the price of house. What we have written? We have written like the authors conducted experiments on predicting the price of house.
Author, ma'am.
Authors, correct? So in active voice, we are emphasizing the doer, and in this particular example, the authors are the doers, right? So the doer seems important. So we are emphasizing the doers. Okay, now if we want to write the same statement in passive voice, then how we are going to write it? We will be writing the statement in passive voice like, experiments were conducted on predicting the price of house by the authors. Experiments were conducted on predicting the price of house by the authors. Okay, now in this particular construction of the statement, the phrase by the authors can be omitted. Which means that the reader already knows, or the reader not actually need to know who is the doer. Only the action is important. So what is the action here? Action is the conduction of experiments, and that is why what we are emphasizing, we are emphasizing the action that is performed. So experiments were conducted. So this is the action, and that we are emphasizing. Okay, so the same statement in passive voice is written like, experiments were conducted on predicting the price of house by the authors, or the doers are not important here, and that is why we can omit that. Okay, so this is the difference in active voice and passive voice. Now, with these basics, we are going to see why and when to prefer active voice and when to prefer passive voice. Okay, so let us see now few important points. Those we should understand while using these voices. Okay, now in fact there are two different thought processes. Few people say that always we should go with active voice, and there is one group of people who say that always we should go with, or we should prefer to use passive voice. Traditionally, whenever the technical documents were written, or traditionally whenever the papers, research papers or reports were written, then traditionally it was accepted that always the report should be written in passive voice and not in active voice. But now few people say that active voice is more clear and it is better to go with active voice. So at the end of this discussion, I will brief you when to use active voice and when to use passive voice while writing our report. Okay, so let us look at few important aspects. Why to prefer active voice and why to prefer passive voice. Okay, so there is a debate in between usage of these two voices while writing the technical document. Okay, so the first important point that we should refer to while dealing with active voice actually improves the readability. So few people actually recommend using active voice, and the reason is they say that active voice is clear, direct, concise, and hence it improves readability. Let us see one example. Okay, suppose we are writing one statement in passive voice. Okay, so the statement is written like the performance of the system was significantly improved by the use of convolutional neural network. So this is the statement written in passive voice. The performance of the system was significantly improved by the use of convolutional neural network. Okay, so this is a statement written in passive voice. If we are making use of active voice, then how we are going to write that statement? We are writing now in active voice like the use of convolutional neural network significantly improved the performance of the system. I'll repeat. The use of convolutional neural network significantly improved the performance of the system. Okay. Now, if we look at these two statements, then we find that if we write this statement in active voice, it is more direct, it is more clear, okay, it is more easy to understand. Do you agree with me?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So this is the reason why we are using active voice sometimes. Okay, because it improves readability. Okay, and these are two examples written in passive and active voice. Okay, now the second reason or the second point that we should consider is use of active voice actually emphasizes author responsibility. Use of active voice emphasizes author responsibility. What does this mean? Typically, few people argue in favor of this active voice. Okay, and what they argue? They argue that if we go with active voice, it emphasizes author's responsibility. And if we go with passive voice, often passive voice makes it unclear who was responsible for the action. Okay, and if we would like to emphasize the author's responsibility while writing the sentence, then we should prefer to use active voice. So active voice is more appropriate when we wish to emphasize a decision. Okay? Whenever we would like to emphasize a decision that is made by the authors, okay, then we should make use of active voice. Let me give one example here. If I'm using, say, passive voice, then maybe I'll be writing the statement like, no effort was made to comprehensively investigate properties of say CNN. Okay, this is simply one example. Okay, do not perceive any meaning out of that. This is simply one example. So in passive voice, we are writing the statement like, no effort was made to comprehensively investigate properties of CNN. So this is a statement. Okay, you may write further, investigate properties of CNN as it was beyond the scope of the present study. Maybe this is the statement. Okay, so this statement is written in passive voice. Now, if we are writing it in active voice, how we are going to write it? We are going to write like, we are taking now the responsibility. Okay, so we will be writing now the statement like, we did not attempt to comprehensively investigate properties of CNN as it was beyond the scope of the present study. Right? So this is the statement written in passive voice. This is the statement written in active voice. Okay. So what is happening here in passive voice? What is the difference in passive and active voice here? Here the decision, some decision we are emphasizing. Okay. So we would like to emphasize a decision that we have taken as authors of a particular study. So we are responsible. We did not attempt to comprehensively investigate properties of CNN. So we did not attempt. So we are taking the responsibility of this work. Okay, and we wanted to emphasize that. So in such situations, it is better to go with active voice and not the passive voice. Okay, so it is more appropriate to go with active voice whenever you wish to emphasize a decision that you took as the author of a particular study. Okay, is that clear? Is that clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Fine. Now, with this second point, let us proceed for the third important point. Many times, after completing our work or even during our research or during the work that we are conducting, we usually publish the papers, technical reports, research papers in journals or in conferences. Okay, so many journals prefer the active voice. Many journals prefer the active voice. Okay, so many times in their guidelines, they mention that the authors should prefer to use active voice while preparing the publication, preparing the manuscript or preparing the paper, because it would help readers comprehend the subject matter more easily because it is in active voice. So active voice, as it explains the things directly, many times the readers are more comfortable with the active voice, and that is why many times the journal publishers provide the guidelines to the authors to write the paper or to write the manuscript using active voice. Okay, so this is one more reason why we should go with the active voice. Okay, so we talked about active voice now, and I hope that all these 3 points are clear. Now let us go to the passive voice. So when the passive voice is preferable. So let me list out now once again few important points. When the recipient is the main focus. When the recipient is the main focus. Say for example, I am giving here the example in active voice and passive voice. Okay. So see here one example. In 1921, researchers at the University of Toronto discovered insulin. It is still the only treatment available for diabetes. This is a statement in active voice. Okay. Now, if the same statement is written in passive voice, then how we are going to write it? Insulin was first discovered in 1921 by researchers at the University of Toronto. It is still the only treatment available for diabetes. If we compare now these two statements, what is the main topic of discussion that you feel? Yes? If we compare these two statements, what do you feel? What is the main topic for discussion here? What is the main focus? We have written these two statements and these two statements. These two statements are in active voice, these are in passive voice. Or rather, focus upon the first statement. In active voice, what we are writing, in 1921, researchers at the University of Toronto discovered insulin. Okay, so here doer has been emphasized, researchers are being emphasized. In passive, what we are saying, insulin was first discovered in 1921 by researchers at the University of Toronto. Okay, so whatever is discovered, that we are focusing, insulin. So in fact, the important focus here, or the main topic for discussion here should be this insulin and not the researchers. Isn't it? What is main focus here, or what should be the topic of discussion here? The invention. And what is that invention? Insulin. Okay, so here the important concern or the main topic of discussion is insulin, and hence this should be focused in the sentence. And if we go with passive voice, then it emphasizes the insulin and not the researchers. Okay, and that is why in this context we should prefer to use passive voice, not the active voice, because here invention is most important rather than who discovered that. Right, so the topic for discussion here is insulin and not the researchers. Okay, we are not omitting the doer here. In passive voice, it is possible to omit the doer. Okay, but here we are not omitting the doer because we want to still mention about the researchers also.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. The next point that we should consider, when the action is more important, we should prefer to use passive voice. So whenever we are discussing experimental procedures, the focus should be on what was done and not on who did it. So if we are performing some experiment, if we are implementing some algorithm, okay, then the focus should be on implementation of algorithm, the process. What was done? But it is not important that who implemented that while writing the document. Okay, so whenever we are discussing about the experimental procedure, the methodology that was carried out to achieve some objective, to achieve some task, then we should use passive voice instead of active voice. Let us see the example. See here the statement written in passive voice. The keyframes were extracted from the video and further processed to detect the facial landmarks. The statement is written in passive voice. The keyframes were extracted from the video and further processed to detect the facial landmarks. So this is the statement in passive voice. So this statement is actually discussing some experimental process, some methodology that is implemented. Okay, now if I write the same statement in active voice, how I am writing it? See here, we extracted the keyframes from the video and further we processed these to detect the facial landmarks. What we are describing? We are describing some process. We are describing some methodology that was followed while experimenting. Okay, we are writing the report. So the reader knows very well who have performed the experiments. Is that okay? We are writing the report or we are writing the paper. So who are the authors? It is known. Who have performed the experiments? It is known to the reader. Right? then is it really important to emphasize that who has done this? Not actually. Okay. What is the process that is followed is most important. What was done is important, and who has performed that is really not important. And that is why, while explaining some experimental procedure or the methodology, we always should prefer the passive voice. See here, it is more clearer. The keyframes were extracted from the video and further processed to detect the facial landmarks. We are writing the report. So obviously, it is implicit in this statement that the authors, whoever is writing the report, they have performed this task. So no need to emphasize that. Okay. Whereas if we write the statement in active voice, we are emphasizing that we extracted the keyframes from the video and further we processed these to detect the facial landmarks. It is not really important to emphasize this. Okay, so while describing this kind of experimental procedure, we should follow the passive voice. So here the process is important, not the researcher or the author who performs that process. So we should go with passive voice. Okay, now the next point that I would mention here is we should avoid repetition. Okay, so many times what happens is if we use active voice, then many times it happens that each sentence written in active voice begins with the words like I or we. So it seems very monotonous and repetitive. Okay, I'll repeat. If we are making use of active voice, then many times it happens that each statement begins with the word like I or we. Okay, and it seems really very monotonous and repetitive. Say for example, here we write this statement like we implemented an algorithm for keyframes detection. Then we use the extracted keyframes for detecting the facial landmarks. So every time we are using here we. Okay, so it is not good for the reader. It seems very repetitive. Okay, so construction of such statements is not that good as far as such or this part of the report is considered. Okay, so if we would like to avoid such kinds of repetitions and the monotonous way of writing, we should avoid using active voice and we should prefer to use passive voice to add some kind of variety into these sentences those we are writing. Okay, so this is the third point that we should consider whenever we are preferring to use the passive voice. So I hope now the points are clear. Right? So I'll be summarizing the things. When we should go with active voice and when to prefer passive voice. So when to prefer active voice or what are the advantages of active voice? Active voice improves readability, of the statement. Then if we want to emphasize author's responsibility, then we should go with active voice. And third thing, many times the journals or the publishers demand to write in active voice. Okay, when passive voice is preferred, when the recipient or the action is important. Second point, or this is when the recipient is main focus. Second point, the action is important. And third point, if we would like to avoid repetition. Okay, in these situations we should follow or we should use passive voice. Okay, so I hope now you are clear with the pros and cons of active and passive voice. Okay, and when it should be preferred. Now, as I stated, there is a debate always whether while writing the report or the technical documents, whether one should go with the active voice or whether one should go with the passive voice. So, with reference to all this discussion, okay, we are coming to the conclusion now. Okay, so when to use active and when to use passive voice whenever we are writing a technical report, various sections of the technical report. So typically you may use active voice in these sections of the technical report, like introduction section, the discussions and the literature review. Okay, say for example, in literature review, you are citing the work of some researchers. So, while writing the literature review, you may write the sentences in active voice. Say for example, you may write the statement like this is name of the author, ETAL, then we cite the paper and we may write how focused upon, something like that. So here we are giving importance to the authors of this paper or this research work. Okay, so we are giving importance to the researchers. So in such situations, we may use the active voice. So active voice can be used in introduction section, discussion section or literature review. But as far as the methodology section is considered or the results are being discussed, we should use the passive voice always. Don't use active voice while writing the methodology or while writing or describing the results. Please understand these points. So you are coming up with the reports now after completing your project, right? And whenever you write a project report, you should follow all those instructions to come up with a good project report. And always the quality of your report should be really good, because whenever the examiner assesses you, okay, the first document that is being reviewed by the examiner is your project report, and it creates the very first impression of yours, right? So project report always should be well written without any errors, no grammatical error, okay, no error related to the flow, the content and so on, right? So always follow these instructions. It will help you a lot while writing the technical documents. Okay, now let us proceed with the next point that we would like to discuss, and that is use of tense. Use of tense. So it is, while writing the reports, it is really very important also to consider the tense of the sentence while writing the documents. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, if you are writing a proposal and if you are describing some methodology that you have not yet implemented, then in proposal you should write it in future tense, because you have not yet implemented, but you are proposing to implement that. So you should mention here future tense. Okay, but whenever it comes to the report, you have implemented the methodology. Already you have carried out the experimentation. You have implemented the methodology and you are now having the results with you. So whenever it comes to report, okay, you should use the past tense while describing the methodology, because it has already been implemented. Okay, now also give preference to active verb forms and impersonal constructions in the simple present. So typically an abstract, methodology and result section are written in simple past tense. Simple past tense. I am talking about the report now. So whenever you are writing the report, the abstract, the methodology and the results, these sections are written in past tense, simple past tense, because they are referring to what was done. Already you have experimented, already you have undergone everything that is related to your report, and that is why you should use simple past tense. Okay, an introduction as well as discussion and the concluding section are typically written in the simple present tense. I'll repeat: introduction, discussion and the conclusion typically are written in simple present tense. So you need to now revise how to write these sentences in simple past tense, simple present tense and so on. So you need to study now the tenses once again. You need to revise those things so that you can use the proper tense while writing your document. So I'm having here some revision. Okay, so you may refer to any English grammar book or any literature just to revise the things. So we are having here few important terms and concepts for understanding correct verb tense choices. Okay, so what are the verbs? Words that describe actions or express the existence. Words that describe actions or express the existence are the verbs. For example, conduct, use, measure, ease, these are the verbs. We know that. Okay. Now what is the tense? Verb forms that express time meanings. I'll repeat. Verb forms that express time meanings are the tenses. Tense appears in both active as well as passive voice. Okay, so we are having here few examples. Okay, so if we are writing in past tense, then the verb in active voice is written like conducted. Let us assume that we are using this verb conduct. If we are making use of past tense, then in active voice we will write conducted. In passive voice we will be writing like was conducted. If we want to use present tense, then in active voice we are making use of this verb conduct as conducts, and in passive voice we will use this word as is conducted. If we want to use future tense, then we are going to write like in active voice will conduct, we will conduct. In passive voice, the statement in future tense will be written like will be conducted, experiments will be conducted. Is that okay? So see here the use of tense, use of a particular word in active voice and passive voice. Okay. Now verb tenses can also be used in perfect and progressive forms. So these forms actually express the meanings about the duration or continuation of the process, continuation of actions. Okay, so see here, if we are using past perfect tense, then we should write in active voice like had conducted, and in passive voice we should write had been conducted. In present perfect we should use has conducted in active voice. In passive voice we should write has been conducted. The experiment has been conducted, or the experiments have been conducted. Okay, in past progressive, meaning the experimentation is still going on, or it was going on past, it was going on in past. So in past progressive, the active voice statement will have the verb like was conducting, and in passive voice it is was being conducted, experiment was being conducted. Okay, now in present progressive we may state in active voice like experiment is, or sorry, we are conducting the experiment, or she is conducting the experiment. In passive voice we are writing like the experiment is being conducted, or the experiments are being conducted. Okay, so this is the way how we should form the sentences using different tense, using different voice. So appropriately we should make use of the tense and the voice depending upon what is the section that we are writing and what kind of document that we are generating. Okay, if it comes to the imperative statement or imperative sentence, a verb form, in imperative sentence, a verb form is used to give commands or instructions or some advice or some warning. So many times while writing the statements in the manuals or providing the instructions, right, we use this form of imperative sentence. So we write the sentence like place the sample on the scale. So we are instructing, place the sample on the scale, or we are instructing, To be careful. So we may write be careful. Okay. So while writing the sentences in the manuals, users manuals, or if we are providing some kinds of instructions, if we are giving some commands, warnings, or if we are advising, then we should make use of such kind of imperative sentences. So these are few of the examples, those are quoted here. So verb tenses actually express the meanings about the time frame of the activities or the processes that are being performed or those were performed, right? So the basic distinction in the meanings of verb forms. So just go through the examples and rather the verb forms and the common meaning of that particular verb form and the example associated. So see here, if we are making use of past tense, then the most common meaning for this past tense is happened in the past or it was true in the past. And the example of the sentence that is written in past tense is like the length of the sample was measured. Okay. If we are making use of present tense, then the meaning of this present tense is it is happening now, it is true now, or it is true generally. And this example is the length of the sample is measured. If we are making use of future tense, okay, then the most common meaning is it will happen or be true in the future. So the example is the length of the sample will be measured. If we are making use of imperative form, then the most common meaning is commands, instructions, advice or warnings. Okay, so the example is measure the length of the sample. So we are instructing, measure the length of the sample, right? So these are few of the examples just for the sake of understanding. So I would recommend you once again to go through all those grammatical details, right? Because it is really very essential now to improve upon your English. Because while writing the technical document, good English is the most essential thing, and the proper use of voice, the proper use of verbs and tenses is most important, and that is why you should once again refresh, revise all those grammatical details. Is that okay? Now, in the next class, we'll be focusing upon few important guidelines regarding structuring of the sentences, and few more important points we will cover in the next session. Those will help you to come up with a good document or a good technical report. So I hope you must have got some insights today. So start working on improving your English, because that needs to be reflected in your technical writing. So let's conclude today.